There is a story in the Old Testament that stands as one of the most harrowing accounts ever recorded, not just in the Bible, but perhaps in all of ancient literature. It is a tale so shocking, so raw in its depiction of human depravity, that many turn away from it, unwilling to confront the darkness it reveals. To some, it is the single most disturbing event in Scripture, a brutal reflection of what happens when morality collapses and chaos reigns unchecked. This story unfolds in Judges chapters 19 to 21, a part of the Bible that is often overlooked or ignored because of its sheer brutality. It is not a comforting story, nor is it one that can be read without feeling deeply unsettled. Yet, within its horrifying details lies a stark and urgent message, a warning about the depths of human wickedness and the devastating consequences of moral and societal decay. Many are familiar with the events of chapter 19, but few continue to read through the end of chapter 21, where the aftermath of the events grows even more disturbing. This is not merely a story, it is an unflinching exploration of a community torn apart by violence, betrayal, and moral corruption. It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the human condition and the fragile line between civilization and chaos. Let us delve into this narrative together, not to sensationalize its horrors, but to understand the weight of its message. To do so, we must not avert our eyes but face the events as they unfold, one devastating moment at a time. We begin in Judges chapter 19, verse 1. In those days, Israel had no king. This is not just a historical marker, it is a foreboding statement. A nation without leadership, without guidance, is vulnerable to the darkest impulses of its people. It is a world where everyone does what is right in their own eyes, regardless of the cost. In this chaotic backdrop, we meet a Levite residing in the mountainous region of Ephraim. Seeking companionship, he takes a concubine, a woman from Bethlehem in Judah. Yet their relationship is far from stable. The concubine, after a period of time, leaves him and returns to her father's house in Bethlehem. For 4 months, she remains there, separated from the Levite, until he decides to journey south to bring her back. What begins as an attempt at reconciliation soon sets the stage for a series of tragic events. The Levite arrives at her father's house, where he is warmly received and treated with hospitality. Yet, the father repeatedly delays their departure, persuading the Levite to stay another night, and then another. Day after day, the Levite reluctantly agrees, until finally he decides it is time to leave. Thanking his father-in-law for the hospitality, he sets off on the return journey with the woman. It is on this journey home that the story takes its first ominous turn. Traveling from the south of Israel back to the north, they arrive near the city of Gibeah, later known as Jerusalem. The Levite's servant suggests they stop and spend the night there, but the Levite refuses. He insists on pressing forward to Gibeah, a city belonging to the Israelites, expecting a safer reception among his own people. When they finally arrive in Gibeah, however, they find no welcome. Hospitality, a cornerstone of Israelite culture, is nowhere to be found. No one offers them shelter as they wait in the city square. As night falls, their situation grows increasingly desperate until an old man from the town notices them. Learning they have no place to stay, he invites them into his home, offering them food, water, and a place to rest. The Levite accepts the offer, assuring the old man that they have their own provisions and only need shelter. For a brief moment, it seems they have found safety, but what follows is one of the most horrifying episodes in the Bible. As the night deepens, a group of men from the city surround the house. Their intentions are vile. They demand that the old man hand over the Levite so they can abuse him. This shocking demand reveals the moral decay that has taken root in Gibeah, a city that was supposed to be a sanctuary for Israelites. The old man, desperate to protect his guest, makes an unthinkable offer. He suggests they take his own virgin daughter and the Levite's concubine instead. It is a disturbing and cowardly attempt to pacify the mob, one that highlights the pervasive brokenness of this society. but the men refuse. What happens next is almost too horrific to recount. In an act of desperation and self-preservation, the Levite forces his concubine out to the mob. The men seize her and subject her to a night of unimaginable violence. They abuse her relentlessly until dawn, only releasing her when they are finished. Gravely injured and barely alive, she somehow manages to return to the house where the Levite is staying. She collapses at the door, her hands outstretched on the threshold. This is where the story begins, not where it ends. What follows in the subsequent chapters is a chain reaction of violence, vengeance, and destruction that will leave an indelible scar on the history of Israel. Prepare yourself, for the descent into Judges chapter 19 is unlike anything you have encountered before. The next morning, the Levite opened the door to a haunting sight. His concubine lay motionless, her hands outstretched on the threshold. The image was one of silent despair, a final cry for help that had gone unheard. Without emotion, he called out to her, instructing her to get up and continue the journey. But there was no answer. The horrors of the previous night had claimed her life. What followed was an act that shocked not only the Levite's contemporaries but also echoes through history as one of the most disturbing decisions recorded in Scripture. The Levite placed her lifeless body on his donkey and returned home. Upon arrival, he made a chilling choice, one that would ensure no one in Israel could ignore what had happened. He dismembered her body into 12 parts, sending each piece to the tribes of Israel as a grotesque message, demanding their attention to the atrocity committed by their own people. This horrifying act of dissection was not merely a call for justice, it was a declaration of the moral and societal decay that had consumed the nation. The tribes of Israel, upon receiving the pieces, were horrified. This act was unprecedented since their exodus from Egypt, and it forced them to confront the depth of depravity within their own land. Indignation, shock, and perplexity rippled through the nation as the tribes gathered to discuss how to respond to such evil. Outrage boiled over into action. The tribes of Israel united against the tribe of Benjamin, where the perpetrators of the crime resided. Their collective fury led to a civil war, a devastating conflict that claimed tens of thousands of lives. The initial battle saw Benjamin, though outnumbered, inflicting heavy losses on the other tribes. But as the war progressed, the tide turned, and the tribe of Benjamin was nearly annihilated, leaving only 600 men alive. With the smoke of battle still lingering, the tribes were faced with a new crisis, the possible extinction of one of their own. The devastation they had wrought in their pursuit of justice now threatened the continuity of the tribe of Benjamin. Without women to marry, the remaining men had no way to perpetuate their lineage. The very survival of Benjamin hung by a thread. Desperate to preserve the unity of Israel's 12 tribes, the Israelites devised a grim solution. They attacked a neighboring clan and captured 400 women, offering them to the surviving Benjaminites as wives. Yet even this brutal measure left 200 men without partners. To resolve this, they concocted a controversial plan during a festival. They permitted the remaining Benjaminites to abduct women during the celebrations, exploiting a loophole to avoid directly breaking their vow not to give their daughters to Benjamin. This series of events, born from violence and perpetuated through morally questionable decisions, underscores the devastating impact of poor judgment and unchecked impulses. What began as an attempt to address a heinous crime spiraled into a cycle of suffering, death, and destruction that affected innocent lives and left scars across the nation. Lessons to reflect upon. First, the absence of leadership leads to chaos. The opening verse, "In those days Israel had no king," is far more than a simple historical statement. It is a dire warning about the consequences of a lack of leadership and accountability. Without a unifying moral compass or authoritative guidance, society becomes vulnerable to disorder and corruption. In this narrative, the absence of centralized leadership allowed individuals to act impulsively, following their own desires without considering the greater good. The result was a breakdown in societal cohesion, leading to unchecked violence and moral decay. This lesson highlights the critical role of strong, principled leadership in maintaining order and preventing the descent into chaos. Second, every human life has inherent worth. The host's horrifying offer to sacrifice his own daughter and the Levite's concubine to protect his guest is a stark example of how deeply flawed societal values had become. This act demonstrates the dangers of objectifying and dehumanizing others, reducing people to mere tools for achieving an end. Such behavior disregards the intrinsic dignity of every human being, a dignity rooted in the belief that all are created in the image of God. This lesson transcends time and culture, reminding us of the moral imperative to uphold and honor the value of every life. Failure to do so leads to systemic injustices, exploitation, and tragedies like those depicted in this story. Third, distance from God leads to moral decay. The book of Judges as a whole paints a picture of Israel's gradual spiritual decline, but the events of chapters 19 to 21 represent its darkest point. This moral collapse was not an overnight phenomenon. It was the cumulative result of years of drifting away from God's principles. The narrative vividly illustrates how this distance from divine guidance allowed individuals and communities to engage in acts of unimaginable cruelty and injustice. The farther we stray from God, the more vulnerable we become to moral corruption and error, losing sight of what is just, compassionate, and righteous. This lesson serves as a warning to remain anchored in spiritual and ethical truths, lest we too fall into similar patterns of decay. Fourth, bad decisions create a ripple effect. The initial crime committed by the men of Gibeah set off a chain reaction of increasingly catastrophic decisions. While the tribes of Israel were rightfully outraged, their response in all-out war against the tribe of Benjamin resulted in the deaths of countless innocents and the near-extinction of an entire tribe. This cycle of violence illustrates how one wrong decision often leads to another, with consequences that spiral out of control. It is a sobering reminder that every choice we make has repercussions, often extending far beyond what we can predict. Thoughtful and measured actions, guided by justice and compassion, are essential to avoid perpetuating harm. Fifth, grace can emerge even amidst failure. Despite the overwhelming failure and destruction, the story concludes with a glimmer of hope. After nearly annihilating the tribe of Benjamin, the other tribes recognized the need for restoration. Through controversial and flawed means, they ensured that Benjamin's lineage would continue, preserving the unity of Israel. This moment demonstrates that even in the darkest circumstances, God's grace can bring redemption and restoration. It serves as a reminder that no failure is beyond the reach of divine mercy, and even the most broken situations can be turned toward healing and renewal. The book of Judges concludes with a haunting phrase. In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. In conclusion, this narrative offers profound and timeless lessons. The absence of leadership breeds chaos. Every human life holds inherent worth and must be treated with dignity. Distance from God leads to moral decay and unimaginable acts of cruelty. The ripple effects of bad decisions are far-reaching, often impacting innocent lives in ways we cannot foresee. And finally, even in the midst of failure and destruction, grace remains a powerful force for restoration. This story challenges us to reflect on the weight of our choices, the values we uphold, and the principles by which we live. It is a sobering reminder that leadership, accountability, and alignment with divine truths are essential to preventing the kind of collapse witnessed in ancient Israel. May these lessons guide us toward justice, compassion, and humility in all we do. Thank you for taking this journey through one of the most challenging narratives in the Bible. May the lessons we've uncovered guide us towards a deeper understanding of justice, accountability, and the enduring grace of God.